Hello, everybody. This is Dennis Todd. I'm a senior sales engineer at Innovative Interfaces. I've worked with the Polaris system for the last 7+ years. This is the fourth in a series of introductory webinars that we're doing for the SILS Consortium about the Polaris system. This webinar will be about Polaris acquisitions. We yesterday talked about cataloging and how it's kind of tough to demo cataloging to such a large and diverse group because everybody does cataloging a little bit different. If that's true about cataloging, it's infinitely more true about acquisitions. And I'm going to stress something, and I probably can't stress it enough, that in the 1 hour that we have, I will show you as much of Polaris acquisitions as I can, but you will all, and you all probably do acquisitions very different from one another. The nice thing about Polaris is we will be able to accommodate a vast array of workflows. So in the short time that we have today, if I don't do it exactly the way your library does it, then don't lose heart. It's just very difficult to try to approach an acquisitions demo from a very generic standpoint. What I'm going to do is first talk about the benefits of doing acquisitions, because I'm not sure if all of your libraries currently are doing acquisitions. Typically, in my experience, in a group as large as yours, you have some that are doing acquisitions, some that do acquisitions electronically, others that may not be doing EDI acquisitions yet, still doing sort of a manual acquisitions process. Others of you may have been doing acquisitions completely manually and perhaps thinking about doing acquisitions. So to start off, what I want to do is kind of discuss the benefits of doing acquisitions in the ILS. So for those of your libraries that are perhaps just thinking about doing acquisitions, this will be kind of maybe a sort of pep talk. Maybe it'll convince you not to do acquisitions yet. We'll just present the information, but hopefully as we go along, you will see bits and pieces that do fit into your workflow. But please don't lose heart if it doesn't look at all like the way you do things. Polaris Acquisitions is a toolkit, and I can really just kind of show you the bits and pieces of the toolkit and hopefully give you a glimmer of how that's going to work into your workflow. So we're going to talk about the benefits first. After that, I'm going to actually show you workflow. And again, it may not be exactly your workflow. I'm going to try to do a couple of workflows. Initially, we'll just add an additional copy of something. We'll assume that you're not doing EDI acquisitions. Maybe a lot of your libraries are, and so finally, I will be sure to show you one way to do online electronic acquisitions. So let's jump in. What are the benefits of doing acquisitions? One of the main benefits, I'm going to bring up my Power Pack, my online catalog from Polaris. One of the main advantages of doing acquisitions is that you see on order items as quickly as possible in the online catalog, and your patrons can start placing hold requests on those items. So when a patron searches, just in the normal course of searching, on order items are integrated into the catalog. You will also notice that on your Power Pack over here in the dashboards, you will have the option to put up an on order titles dashboard. And this content here is populated automatically by Polaris. So you're not having to pull together batches of records or put together lists of items that are on order. When you order something using Polaris Acquisitions, this dashboard is automatically populated. So we have this Mind Over Matter by Nora Roberts, and if I click on that title, it takes us into the online catalog. We see the brief information. We see that there are 0 of 3 copies available throughout the consortium, and I can click where is it, And we see the 3 copies. We've got one copier at the Xavier branch, and it's in repair. So that might have been what motivated us to order more copies in the first place. So we've ordered one copy for Red Rock Public Library and one copy for Bedford Falls. My demo database, by the way, is a consortium, smaller than yours. Most consortia are smaller than yours. But I have got in the consortium multi-site libraries. So Red Rock and Bedford Falls both belong to the same county system, sort of in my demo setup here. So in doing orders, and you'll see that as I show you my examples, I'm ordering for several different branches. Red Rock, Bedford Falls. One thing, my understanding is you're coming from a Millennium and Sierra background. Polaris does acquisitions a little bit different. My understanding in Millennium Sierra acquisitions that kind of at this stage in the process of ordering, you have an order record that represents all of the order data. Polaris actually does it a little bit differently, and this will be a change in paradigm for you, but really the end result in the online catalog is the same. With Polaris, if you want on-order information to show up early on, and most libraries in my experience do, they have Polaris create the actual item record when the order is finalized. And that's much earlier in the process than in Millennium Sierra when you create the actual item record. But we create the item record as the order is finalized, and all of the order data and the order status is represented on the item record. And that is the item record that ultimately becomes the item record in cataloging. It doesn't have a barcode yet. You may or may not have identified the exact collection that it's going to. You may or may not have identified call number and that sort of thing. But it is at least the seed information on the item record. So that is one of the big advantages. On-order data shows up in the catalog. And if we go back to our portal page, our very initial welcome page, we've got that list of on-order items. You don't have to get to them just from here. If a patron is oblivious to the dashboard over there and just types in Anakin's Quest, right there in the process of searching, and we might have a couple of editions here, and they will see those on order copies in the process of just doing searches in the online catalog. So, and you can see we have a place request, even though when I say where is it, all of my copies are on order. Actually, we do have one copy that is in actual circulation, but regardless of whether there are any actual circulating copies yet, even if all we have are on order copies, we still have a place request button, and patrons can start placing requests on those. Probably the biggest advantage, getting those records in the catalog early. There are ways to do that manually not using the acquisition system, but acquisitions is a really handy way to get those data, to get that data updated. Now, the second most valuable thing about automating acquisitions is the fact that you will be able to keep track of your fund accounting. So as you order items, and then later as you get invoices and finalize those invoices, all of the math in keeping track of what you have agreed to buy, what you have actually bought, all of that math is done for you automatically, and it's kept up to date in real time, right up to the second. So if I want to see where I stand with my fund accounts, I can come to Utilities, Reports and Notices, and in my reporting, there of course is a large number of acquisitions reports. Notice with reports I've got all my different areas, and if we go to acquisitions, we can run the fund summary report or the fund hierarchy report. Great reports, by the way. There's also another great reason to do acquisitions is you can get you can get a lot of great performance reports on your various suppliers, your vendors. But let's look at this fund hierarchy report. Now, I have several fiscal years that I can choose from. In a consortium, you will only see the fiscal years that you have permission to work with. So that's very important. There's the assurance that no one else, if they don't have permission in the consortium, can run your reports or see your data. That's going to be true throughout acquisitions, and I will point it out in a number of places, that no one else is seeing your data, no one else is creating purchase orders or seeing your invoices, messing with your invoices, your fund accounts. There is complete isolation, library by library by library. So here's the fund hierarchy report, and here's my top level budget. That's how much I have. Encumbered is how much I have on POs. Spent is how much I've actually got on invoices from the vendors. Total free and percent used. It looks like I need to really get busy ordering. I've got way too big a budget for my little demo system here. But there you go. And if I look down here at Red Rock Public Library, now the fund accounts, I'll show you in a second, we'll be able to see it a little more visually, but the fund accounts, how they're named, how they're organized, how many you have, all of that is up to you, library by library. You very much independently decide on the structure. So I have my top level materials budget summary, and then at Red Rock I have adult fund here, and this is the sum of all of these funds below it, and the same thing here. I've decided to have a children's summary account, and under that, adding up into it, I have children's books, children's media, children's serials. So you can create summary accounts and as many levels of summary accounts if you want. If you have 3 branch libraries, you could have a summary account for each branch, and then within each branch you could have adult, children's, media, serials, however you want to organize it, it's totally up to you. Donation accounts. Polaris handles donation accounts very elegantly. So a real nice report. I've got it here in PDF. You can get it in all kinds of formats. All of our reports can be output in PDF format. In fact, take a look here. We went through this in our section on reports, but if this is the first time you're seeing it, just mention it's especially important with financial reports to be able to output them in Excel or comma delimited format if you want to be able to work with them in a spreadsheet. All right. Now, that was one way to look at the fund accounts. Actually, if you're just in the middle of your day and want to check out where you stand, another way, by the way, this is the Polaris toolbar, shortcut bar. All of my acquisitions functions are here in the drop-down menu. And if I want to look up all the funds, or if I want to start with a given fiscal year, and I'm going to say just show me all of the open fiscal years that I'm responsible for. Now again, on my demo system, I'll point this out several times, there are probably about a dozen different fiscal years for different libraries in my demo consortium. I'm only responsible for Fox. So when I do a search for fiscal years, even though those others are all in there, because of the permissions on my user account, I am only seeing Fox. So I can bring up the fiscal year, or I can bring up the fiscal year fund explorer, and here we saw this. This is the same data we were looking at just a second ago, just in a different format. Rather than going and running a report and maybe printing it out or whatever we do with the PDF, this is kind of an online in-place way of looking at that same data. And it's kind of handy. You notice that it's a great way to get a sense of the hierarchy, how funds are rolling up into summary accounts. And as I mentioned, you can have multiple levels of these. But wherever you put your cursor, over here, it's going to give you where you stand in your numbers with that account. So here's the adult book account, and it is a child account to the adult summary account. So when I look down here, here are the totals of all of the accounts that are under that account. So that's a great way. One other great way to be able to see where you stand with your numbers, rather than using that Fund Explorer, we can say, I'm looking at this open fiscal year. Let's go look at all of the funds. So I just right-clicked there, and here are all of my funds. I really kind of like this way of looking at them because you see kind of everything all in one view here. Here are my adult books, and there's my total budget, my encumbrances, my expenditures, and the free balance. Like everywhere else in Polaris, we can resort this list. So if I want to see which funds have the greatest budgets down to the least, which ones we've spent the most on with POs so far, how much we've actually spent on invoices, which funds we have the most free balance on left, we can do that. Now, if I want to go into this adult book fund, I can just double click on it and we actually bring up the fund account. Things you can do from the fund account as you're looking at it. You can adjust fund balances and you can transfer funds. One thing I really like about this display is when you're looking at the fund, it gives you the audit trail of what has been spent and encumbered on that fund. So if we were to go do a purchase order right now and charge against this fund, we would see those line items right here in the fund as well. If we want to see, as we're looking at a given fund, where that fund stands, then here's all of the numbers, how much we've expended and encumbered. For a given fund, you can also set limits, so people can't over-encumber or over-expend, and if they get close to the limits, then Polaris will actually display a warning. So that's what that's for. So if we wanted to adjust our fund balances, let's say the director gave us an additional allocation in a given fund account, we can simply come in here and say we're going to add some money to our allocation. Not that I need it on that fund account, but if they give us an additional $1,000, and we can say the director was feeling particularly benevolent today. That happens all the time, right? And you see right down there, now that we've made that adjustment, we've got that audit trail right there in that historical line item history. So, fund accounting, very, very detailed work that you can do. And like I said, any changes you make are reflected right up to the moment. So, that done. Those are all the benefits. Oh, there's one other benefit I do want to mention, and that is, in a second, we're going to start doing workflow. We're going to show you how to actually order stuff through Polaris Acquisitions and track it through receiving the invoice, receiving the items, and reconciling all that stuff. As we order material, then we hope that most of it comes, but invariably some of it doesn't come for whatever reason. One big advantage of using Polaris is Polaris has a claiming process built in, and the system will automatically produce notices to go to your suppliers if material doesn't arrive when in the time frame that you expect it to arrive. So here's a claim alert list. What you can do in Polaris is say, if stuff doesn't arrive on time or in the time frame that I expect it, you can say either I want claims to just automatically go out, and they either go out email or they go out print. And Polaris will just produce them and keep track of what you're not getting. They can either go out automatically, or each one of your libraries can set a setting to say, I don't want them to go automatically. I want to have to vet each claim before it actually goes out. And that's what this claim alert list is for. These are claims that the system is automatically generated because these are titles, orders that didn't show up in time. And so it's giving us the opportunity, and over here you can see the supplier. I've got a lot of Baker & Taylor, Brodart, ULS, Midwest Tape. This gives me an opportunity to actually come through and approve the claims that I really do want to send out. So you could just come to this work form and say go ahead and cancel it, or you can cancel the claims. If you think, yeah, they're having a hard time, they're just a little backed up, we're not going to send those claims. Now, I've mentioned a few times there that claims are produced for material when it doesn't arrive within a time frame. Well, what is that time frame? What defines that? Let's go look at a supplier record. And we're going to look at United Library Services. I do a search and I bring it up. And by the way, if you all have an account with ULS, Midwest Tape, Baker & Taylor, Indigo, whoever you have an account with, you will each have your own supplier record. And depending on how you set up the permissions, but typically we set up the permissions so that, again, your library only sees your accounts, your supplier accounts. So there might be 300 different supplier records for ULS, but when you do a search and as you do acquisitions, you will only see the supplier record for your library. And you can set up multiples. If you have one account with ULS for firm orders and another account for blanket orders and another account for whatever standing orders, you can have multiple ULS accounts, but you will only ever see your ULS accounts. So we were talking about claims. Now here's the supplier record. There are multiple forms, multiple pages on the work form, multiple views on the work form. For this ULS account, here is the default claiming behavior. Every time you create a purchase order and you order from ULS, this claiming behavior will be copied to the purchase order. You will be able to change it if you want. This is just the default for everything you order from ULS, but every purchase order you can change the claiming cycle. But for ULS at my library, at Red Rock Public Library, we've said we're going to send 2 claims, and the first one's going to be sent 60 days after we expected it. The next one's going to be 30 days after that. Now this is really nice down here. You have a checkbox to say, and if we go through that entire claim cycle and we still haven't gotten it, we're going to send a cancellation notice and we're going to have Polaris automatically cancel that line item after we've waited an additional 30 days after the claiming cycle. And then down here we say we send email claim notices to ULS. But if a given title goes all the way through, not a title, if a specific order for a copy of a title goes all the way through the claim process and we don't get it, the way we've got it set up right here right now is Polaris will automatically cancel that order and send a cancellation notice to the vendor, ULS in this case. The other thing is, if there have been holds accumulated on a given order and we never ever get it, and if there are no other copies that could potentially fill a hold, that are eligible to fill the hold for that title, Polaris will automatically cancel the holds when they cancel the order and of course send a holds cancellation notice to the patron. So all that workflow is managed for you automatically. We've got it set up here within ULS. This is how we've defined the behavior, and now as we create purchase orders with this supplier, all of that management is just going to happen. So I'm going to close that supplier record, and now we're ready to actually order stuff. We're going to do the work that generates all of those benefits. I'm going to start very simple. again, this is kind of the hard part because everybody does acquisitions differently. I'm going to start with a very simple model. I'm going to follow a couple of different models for creating orders in Polaris. The model that we find a lot is the one I'm going to do last. So if what I do here first isn't how you do it, hold on, and maybe you do it last. The thing I'm going to do last is I have gone on to a vendor's website, like ULS, Baker and Taylor, Ingram, Brodart, whomever, an EDI vendor, and I have filled out a cart, and I have actually put together what I want to order on the vendor's website. And then I'm going to order through Polaris, and everything's going to happen electronically. But before I show you that workflow, I'm going to show you a situation, a scenario for a library that perhaps does not do electronic ordering. More of kind of a traditional ordering scenario. So we'll start there and show a couple of variations. So here we are in Polaris. We want to order something. So I click that button there on the toolbar that represents a new item. This is where we create anything new. And I go down to say I want to start a new purchase order. And we say OK. Polaris automatically provides a PO number if you want. If you want to provide the PO number, then you're perfectly fine coming in and providing your own. I like to put my initials on a purchase order because there might be several of us that work on these. Now the key piece, as we fill out the basic information, notice there's our claiming information, and it's all blanked out at this point because the most important thing here is to go and identify the supplier. So I'm going to order this from United Library Services. So I do a search for suppliers, and you'll notice now that I've done that, ULS is filled in here, and also the claiming information has defaulted in now that I've specified the supplier. And you should recognize these values. These are the values we were just looking at. But if for this specific order, if I want to change how that works, then I'm not locked into the default from the supplier. I can change that on this particular individual purchase order. So we've done what I like to call the header, the very top information. Now we go to the next view, which is the purchase order line items. So here we're going to put the actual title that we're going to order. We've said who we're going to order it from. We've identified the PO number, some of the foundational stuff. Here's where we actually get down to brass tacks and say what it is we want. So I'm going to add a line item, and now I identify what I want to order. Now, if I'm just ordering something that's already in my catalog, then there's a number of ways I can do that. I can type in a title. So if I say Invisible Murder, it's going to look in my catalog for that, and it automatically invokes my find tool. This is my staff searching. And I identify that, and because this was already in my catalog, then it has linked it to that bibliographic record. And we're ready to go. By the way, I could have also, if for some reason I have one copy of this in hand, and maybe it's damaged and I'm going to send it out for repair, but in the process I want to order some more copies, I can scan the ISBN. In fact, you'll notice the prompt actually says ISBN. I searched for title, but that was just a handy little shortcut. I can scan the ISBN and it will just bring the record in. It doesn't even invoke the find tool. And you can get the ISBN from anywhere. If you're looking at a book review site and they've listed titles and ISBNs, you can just type in the ISBN. And if it's already in your catalog, Polaris will find it. There's actually a way, even if it's not in your catalog, to go out and find the bibliographic record somewhere else and use that as the basis. Or finally, you don't have to have the MARC record at all. We could just type in an ISBN, type in a title, and any of the other information that we have, and go ahead and use that as the basis for the PO line. So we've identified the title that we want to order and the edition. Now we come down here and I'm going to identify the price, discount, discount price. By the way, the discount percentage defaulted in from the supplier record. I don't know if you noticed when we were looking at ULS's record, they had a default 40% discount. But of course I can change that here if I need to. Let's say that we're going to assume it's not quite so generous, and I change the discount rate and the discount price is automatically changed. Now you'll notice down here we have the option of saying how many copies we want to order and for which location. So I mentioned that I actually order for a number of libraries, so I'm going to get 2 copies for Red Rock, and if I want, I have the option of identifying a collection. Definitely want to identify the fund account that that's coming from. And if I want to order now for another library, I can actually just say replicate all those values down to a new line, but instead of this one going to Red Rock, this 2 copies or 1 copy is going to go to Bedford Falls, and so forth. So 2 copies for Red Rock, 1 for Bedford Falls. If I go ahead and save that PO line and we back out to our purchase order, remember here's where we typed in ULS and we came down to the second view and said now here's the title that we want to order, we're all set to go. So I save what I've done so far, and now notice the status on this purchase order is pending. So this is not official yet. What I need to do is come up to Tools and say Release. And that makes this official. Do you want to generate on-order item records? This is the thing we discussed when we were looking at the online catalog. We can generate the on-order item records right now. Some libraries don't want patrons placing holds until we actually get the item. So you can actually mask the bib record and the item record until the material is actually received. But most libraries I run into do want to generate that on-order item information right away. Now, if you've seen any of the other sessions in Polaris, we've talked about a neat feature where you can be in the middle of any process and go visit and or work on, if you have the permission, other records in the database. So I can right click if I want to see what this looks like in the online catalog now. I don't have to go actually search the online catalog. Let's bring up the MARC record. So I right click, link to the bibliographic record. There's the MARC record. And I may or may not have permission to actually edit the MARC record, depending on my role in the library. But I can click on this button here and see the pack preview. So there's Invisible Murder. Remember, we ordered 4 copies. And I can even click on the Where Is It to see what this looks like to my patrons. So there's the 3 copies for in the new books collection, or it will go into the new books collection, that call number for Red Rock Public Library, and there's the 1 copy that we have on order for Bedford Falls Public Library. So it's the same sort of information. We've finalized the order, and we're just storing the information, the order status and everything on the item record, but those item records are actual Polaris item records now. We're looking at the MARC record, and we can pop over and here's the actual list of the item records. If I bring up an item record, it doesn't have a barcode yet, obviously, because it's not even here yet. But all that data and all that work that we've done so far is forming the seed of the item record. The Polaris item record does have a view where we see all of the information on that order record that we just created. And that will live on with the record going forward. So we've got those 4 records. And I back out of all that little rabbit hole we kind of went down there, and we're right back on the purchase order. So we transmit this, and if this is an electronic order, you'll say File, Send, and that will send the electronic order. We can print purchase orders, obviously. Not many libraries are doing a lot of this, but on occasion you need. But however you transmit that purchase order, you will send it off to the vendor. Now, let's say a week goes by and it shows up. In the shipping crate, there will be a paper invoice. And the paper invoice, of course, we're all very familiar with that. In a manual process, a non-EDI process, I'll show you the the automatic process in a second, but in a very simple, straightforward, non-electronic process, we get that paper invoice and we need to tell Polaris that this shipment has arrived and we need to receive those items. So now I need to tell Polaris, I've got another piece of paper here, and it's an invoice from ULS, and we need to not only identify that we've got this invoice from ULS, but we need to identify the individual line items, just like we did on the PO, identify the individual line items that are on that. In addition to the individual line items, an invoice will often contain header charges. For example, shipping. And you can either apportion shipping across the individual line items on an invoice, or you can do as I'm doing here and say, I'm going to actually attribute shipping, and let's say there's also a charge for cataloging services, and I'm actually charging them specifically to accounts that I've got set up. In fact, I have an account here for cataloging services. So there are header charges. What you want to do is with your invoice, basically, right now I've said this invoice is $45, but we know that it's more than that because we have not identified the actual line item that's on this particular invoice, or line items. So now we've got the physical material, and we need to say that we got it and identify the actual titles that we've received. So I can come down here. One of the easiest ways to do this is the physical material have ISBNs that you can scan on them. So I took the book, at least the first one of the, what were we expecting, 4? 3, and scanned in the ISBN off the book, and it identified that this is Invisible Murder. And all we have to do is say Save Next, and we're ready to receive the next title. And we close that, and that's assuming, of course, that the amount that we ordered it was the same as the invoice. As we were receiving it there, I had a field where I could have changed the price. If the price came in different than what we ordered it as, then you can change it. And of course, even after I've done that quick receipt, I can also change it here on the fly. But now we've got our invoice for the Invisible Murder. We've got the header charges. We've identified the line item on the invoice. We've received the 3 copies. The only thing we have to do now is come up to Tools and say Pay. That makes the work final. So we go ahead and say OK, and that invoice is paid. As soon as I said pay, it did the math of disencumbering the numbers that we put in when it was a purchase order, when it was encumbered, and moved them over to the expended column in the fund accounts. And if you're curious, let's say you receive a huge order and you wonder, it's getting near the end of the fiscal year, and you wonder how you're doing with an account, if you're getting close to your thresholds. Again, here's that magical linking ability. And we can come down to funds and say, show me my funds. And remember, I've got that one fund for cataloging services. So we've actually dealt with a couple of different funds on this invoice. And it shows us the status, where we stand right up to this second, right after that transaction, in each of those funds. And we're done taking a glance and we go away. Let's say one of those copies we received, after a second glance, there's a little bit of damage and we're not sure that we want to keep it. If you want to call your supplier as you're working on this invoice, we can link to the supplier record. Give them a call, look up their various phone numbers and contact information, give them a call. And then we're right back to the invoice. We really love that ability to pop back and forth. Okay, so we have gone through the entire acquisitions process. We've ordered, waited a week or two, then the shipment came in and we took the invoice and represented on the invoice exactly what it was. Now let's say we take a look up here at the total, 104.61, and we notice, even though we've paid this thing, we notice that that's not quite right. And we go, uh-oh, there was an additional header charge that we missed. Now it's done all the math, but you can actually come back up to Tools and undo payment of the invoice. Essentially, that's reopening a closed invoice. And we can fix our issue. We can come down here and say, I've got an other charge of $13.50 and account for that. And add that into our header charges. And once we fix that and we go, okay, now the total on our invoice is exactly what's on the paper invoice, let's come down and pay that. Okay. And again, we can look at our bibliographic record to see what effect all of that has had on our records. There's that same invisible murder. Copies available are still 0 of 4 because we haven't taken it to circulation and scanned them in. But now when you look, we've got in process. So when they're received, when the invoice is finalized and we've received the copies, then the status changes from on order to in process. That is sort of a traditional process. Now, some of you may be doing exactly that. Some of you may be doing something close to that, or some of you may be doing nothing at all like that. What we are finding a lot nowadays is the scenario that I described initially, where libraries are going to vendor websites, just like you and I go to Amazon, and we're filling out a cart. And in bigger libraries, we might even have multiple carts, and different selectors will go on and create all of their different carts. The end result of all of that is, from the vendor website, after you've created all of your carts of exactly what you want, most vendors actually let you download the MARC records. So it would be like you and I going on to Amazon and not only just saying go ahead and order these, one-click order or whatever, but as if we could download the data and put it on our PC in a spreadsheet or something. I have already gone on to, I use Baker & Taylor as a vendor. There are quite a few vendors that we do online ordering with, and I have already created a cart. And I have already downloaded MARC records for all of those titles that I put on my cart. Now you and I are going to order them. We're going to put them into Polaris and we're going to order them. So to get mark records into the system, if you were on yesterday for cataloging, you saw us do this a couple of times, I think. We're going to do an express import. I have different profiles, and I have a profile set up specifically for acquisitions order records. The load profiles determine how Polaris is going to process this particular batch of records. So now all I have to do is tell Polaris where those records are. And what we're doing is ordering, we're going to have Jan Martel come to the library, so we want to make sure we have plenty of books on hand beforehand. So we've done an order of 4 or 5 of his titles. So I'm going to select that file of mark records that we got from the vendor system, and I say import. And Polaris submits that file, and it says okay. They are now in the central server. And Polaris, again, if you saw cataloging, you saw this exact same thing. Polaris pops up a screen, and there's a list of all of the mark record loads that we've done in the past, and right up here at the top is this file that we've just submitted. The status is pending. Polaris has not woken up to process these yet, but it will just in another couple of seconds. By the way, it says we've got 3 records, so there were 3 records that I'm ordering, basically 3 titles that I'm ordering from my online vendor. If I click this refresh button, now the status has changed to running. Polaris has woken up, and it's found those mark records, and it's putting them in. In fact, it's all done now. Status is completed. So the mark records are in our system. We have not even ordered them yet. You have the option of saying, I want those mark records to start appearing the very second I put them in the catalog. Or you have the option of saying, no, I only want the mark records to appear if and when I've actually finished the order. So that's up to you. But at this stage, whenever we load mark records, they go into a batch that we call a record set, and we're going to bring up that record set. And here it is. We've got 3 records in this acquisitions record set, and all I have to do is pop it up, and here are the 3 titles. Beatrice and Virgil, The Facts Behind the Helsinki, I'm not even going to try to say that word, and Self. If we want to see the quality of the records that we got from the vendor, when we look at a record set, we can double click on the line item. If your library does EDI electronic ordering now, this information down here may look familiar to you. This is the information that you entered, the actual order specific information that you entered on the vendor site, that through the mark record now is being transmitted and communicated to your Polaris acquisitions. But you can look here, if you're a little familiar with these tags, I've ordered 1 copy at $23.95 from Red Rock, and it's going into the new book collection, and it's being ordered against the Adult Books Fund. We'll see that in a little bit more user-friendly status in a second. But here's the mark records that we just loaded. My load profile did say display and pack, so my library has said the minute those mark records hit the catalog, let's have them displaying. And like we showed you a minute ago, we can pop over to the bib record and you can even preview what that mark record looks like. Notice down here, 0 copies, because we haven't actually ordered them yet. So let's order them. From the bib record set, up under Tools, remember the bib record set is our batch. This is the batch of records that we just loaded. They all got put together, and we can say add all of these records to a new purchase order. And I go ahead and provide some default data. Most importantly, we say who we're going to order it from, and I choose my Baker & Taylor firm account, and we say OK. Now you may be thinking, Dennis, But I thought, why am I creating a purchase order? Because I thought I already ordered these on the vendor website. In this workflow, and again, you may do things differently and you are not locked into this workflow, but in my workflow, I still fill out the carts on the ULS website, the Baker & Taylor, the Midwest website. I fill out the data, I fill out the carts on their website, but I do not order. I use the website to identify what I want, but we're actually going to pull the trigger on the order from within Polaris, and you'll see why that's critical in a second. So let's go over and look at, we're going to link to the purchase order that just got created from that record set. So this is the second time you and I have gone through and created a purchase order. And the first time, you had to fill all of this out, and you had to identify the title that went on that purchase order. The beautiful thing about the EDI process is we downloaded this MARC record from the system, from the vendor system, and it contained all of the information about the individual titles that we want to order. Now let me point out something about the Polaris purchase order. The first purchase order you and I did about 10 minutes ago, I just put one title on the purchase order. It is my understanding that is the model that you are kind of familiar with in Millennium Sierra. My understanding of Sierra and Millennium acquisitions is you order one title at a time. Polaris gives you the ability to have one purchase order. So here's one order, 2014-1416, that we're ordering from Baker & Taylor. But on this one purchase order, you can have as many purchase order line items as you want. So on our cart, on the vendor system, we added self, Beatrice and Virgil, and the facts behind Helsinki. And you can have all three of these on the one purchase order. Now if you look over here, there's a column that says how many copies we've ordered. And we actually said, and this is the part we didn't show you, but when we were on the vendor's website, we said we wanted 3 copies when we were filling out our cart. And when we filled out our cart, we identified which of our libraries we wanted those copies to go to. And we identified the quantity, the collection, the fund. So all that work that we did on the vendor website transfers over, and you do not have to re-enter any data. All that work got transmitted on the bibliographic record. So all we need to do is say, here's our purchase order, here's the 3 titles we put on our cart, and even do some fun stuff like say, hey, the Beatrice and Virgil, we've got a book club that's going to read that, and that's why we've ordered more copies. So in fact, let's go out and place a hold request right here from the purchase order, and it fills in the title that we're in the middle of ordering, and all we have to do is come up here and say, let's search for our patrons by book club, and I've got a Joie de Livre book club out there, and we're going to put everybody in our book club on hold for that title. And now there are holds on that. And if we do as we've done so many times before, we go look at what that bib record looks like just to show you that the data gets updated here immediately in real time. There are now 7 holds on Beatrice and Virgil. Here's the MARC editor, and we're looking at the pack preview. So the only other thing we have to do now is, as we did before, finalize this purchase order by selecting release. And it reminds us, hey, Baker & Taylor accepts EDI orders. So you have finalized, you've released this purchase order, and now you come up and do a file send. And that transmits it electronically from your system to the vendor's system. no FTP, no having to save off the order record. This is actually pulling the trigger with the vendor. You do a send, and then at any point down the road, you can actually come back to this purchase order, and Polaris tells you the details about the file that was actually transmitted to the vendor. Now, here's why it's important to actually initiate the order from within Polaris and not from the cart on the vendor site. Because by doing this order within Polaris, you have initiated an electronic conversation that you're going to be able to take advantage of. Because in a week or two, we're going to get this shipment, and there's going to be a paper invoice. But I'm going to set something up right now. This little bit of work that I'm doing here, Polaris does this automatically, so you almost have to close your eyes and just pretend. Because what I'm going to do is create a new invoice. I don't know if you remember, we created an invoice and we had to go out and we had to scan the ISBN number of the title that was on the invoice. And even all that work that I did just now, Polaris does automatically. Here's the electronic conversation that happens. When you submit an electronic order, an EDI order, to the vendor, Polaris every day or multiple times a day, your Polaris system, no staff involvement whatsoever, your Polaris system goes out and checks with the vendor's system to see if they have any records for you, any electronic records. Typically, the first type of electronic record they have for you when you've initiated an electronic order out of Polaris is the purchase order acknowledgement. And it looks something like this. So you send an electronic order, and usually in pretty short order, they come back and tell you, here are the ones that are back ordered, here are the ones that we're going to supply. And you don't have to do anything. All you do is go into Polaris, into the reports and notices, and say, print out the purchase order acknowledgement. Most importantly, so that's the first thing. Most importantly, the order went in, and a week or two goes by. Every day, Polaris is checking their server, and one day, down the road, Polaris finds an electronic invoice. The Polaris system grabs the invoice, downloads it into Polaris, and processes it in the software, and you get a PDF, you get an email with a PDF attached that says, guess what? You're going to be getting a shipment, and here is the electronic invoice. And do you remember that invoice that you and I had to hand create? So if I come out here and say, show me my invoices that I've worked on today, here's that first one that you and I, for 118.11, and we had to fill out the header, and we had to fill out the line item and all that. When you do EDI, when you do electronic ordering, the invoice just shows up. Polaris went and grabbed it, put it in, and this 162.90 on this PO, and I'm going to pop the full PO up, this 162.90 is exactly the number that will be on the paper invoice. And Polaris automatically loaded in all of the line items on the invoice. No, you don't have to scan the ISBNs. This data entry is already done. And even if we ordered self at $42.50, the invoice will include the correct amount, the electronic invoice. So no data entry correcting the amount. You and I, on the header charges, had to identify those 3 line items in the header. Electronic invoices that Polaris downloads automatically from your supplier will automatically contain all of the header charge information already filled out. You have to do no data entry. And literally, when you receive the shipment and you check it all, and you definitely got 3 copies, 3 copies, 3 copies, All you have to do is come up here and say Tools Pay. No data entry on the invoice whatsoever.